Welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Michael Witcoff, otherwise known as Brother Augustine, who is an author and a Jewish convert to Eastern Orthodoxy. And in this conversation, we talk about the content of Eastern Orthodox faith and his conversion through various forms of spiritual seeking to this final form. We also talk about his values and what makes him tick overall. Very fascinating guy, very well learned and well spoken, and it was great to hang out with him, and I learned a lot, and I know you will too. So without further ado, here is Michael Witcoff, otherwise known as Brother Augustine. And the flag behind you?
Byzantine Empire.
Oh, sheesh. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
You guys are on the rise from what I hear.
That's the goal, man. That's the goal. We're working on it day by day.
Oh, sweet. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for giving me a shot.
Yeah, man. Of course. I know we were talking before Lent, and then I disappeared from the internet for a while. And thank you for reminding me.
Absolutely. No. I'm always exploring, and I enjoy your Twitter presence. So I just want to do a profile. Are you big into these streaming things? Do you do a lot of this stuff?
Not as much as I used to. I used to be a pretty regular YouTuber, 2-3 videos a week, and then I just kind of every once in a while now, maybe one a month.
So you've said your piece. You've made your point.
For now. Okay. For now.
Cool.
What about you, man? What's I don't know much about your story, and I've seen you have a lot of people that have detransitioned on your channel, which I really appreciate that you do that people can hear those stories. It's really important, I think. But beyond that, and I've seen you talk about gender ideology and stuff, I'm not too sure what your worldview is beyond that. I don't know if you want to talk about that on the show or, we're already recording, aren't we?
I'm just going to cut in when things get interesting. This is my method.
Fair.
But yeah. But
fair enough.
Yeah, I just stumbled into the detrans topic because I was making content, and I got hooked up with that because I was exploring after the Evergreen situation, which was a social justice protest or riot or just madness based on race. And then I was investigating more college fiascos, and I stumbled on the Lindsay Shepherd thing, Wilfrid Laurier, at the end of 2017, where she was up in Canada. This young teacher's assistant got berated for 40 minutes for showing a clip of a Jordan Peterson video on pronouns, just a debate. And then they, her professors and the DEI officer gave her a struggle session. She recorded the whole thing, published it. And then when she published it, there was a bunch of media attention. And then the marginalized group on college did the same thing at Evergreen, where they said, our lives are in danger. You need to give us complete and total authority over what everybody can say and think and do. And that was about the gender topic. So I started to investigate the gender topic, and the race topic is just so freaking fraught. Just race in America is just so, it's astroturfed. It's a much bigger deal than it really is. In certain respects, there's a lot of people making a lot of money off of it, so it doesn't seem like it'll ever stop being an issue.
I sure agree with that, yeah.
The gender topic is universal. It hits in the family, and it also brings up a lot of my core interests, which is what is it to be a human being, and human beings come in two types. There's no such thing as a human. There's men and women, and together they articulate society and culture. And I stumbled into the detransitioner topic, and the stories that I found there were, they have this very, just aesthetically speaking, to abstract from the personal, they just have this very pleasing arc of going down a road and then turning around toward truth, and undergoing a deep sense of, shame, resentment, regret, guilt. And so it's just got so much core human truth that every single person that goes through it really has to come to terms with who they are. So I know I got into it before it became a political topic, but now that it's a political topic, more and more people are coming out with it, and I'm not really care so much about the political aspect as the personal. So I continue to do that. just because
I got an interesting story for you about
Oh,
detransitioning, if you're curious.
yeah.
It's very timely too. So I have two friends, Orthodox Christian friends. They are both male, and earlier in their lives, they were in a homosexual relationship with each other. At some point, they decided, this was before they were Orthodox, at some point, they decided that they were actually women. And so they together went to a different country and received surgery of some kind. I have not yet asked, even though I'm sure they'd be open about it, what extent this surgery was, right? So now they're, women in quotes. And at some point, they realize the horror of what they've done to themselves. And they decide that this was all a big mistake. They should never have done this. They've ruined their lives. And they start wanting to be Christian. One of them, at least, had grown up in Russia, so he was very familiar with Orthodox Christianity. The other one, I'm not sure if he was Christian before all this. But they decide to, first of all, live in chastity and stop, sodomizing each other sorry, I don't have a more polite word than that. And they decide to become Orthodox Christians and start living in a Christian way. So they join the Orthodox Church. I guess one of them rejoins, technically. And they decide that actually the canonical Orthodox Church is not strict and traditional enough. So they go off into what we call a schismatic group, like a group that considers itself hyper-traditional, hyper-correct, hyper-strict. So they go from that one extreme to the conservative extreme, you could say, traditional extreme, and then eventually realize the error of that. So they come back to the middle way, the royal path of the genuine Orthodox Church, I should say. But you have to be careful with those words, because these hyper groups call themselves true Orthodox and genuine Orthodox. So you got to be careful with it. And one of them, these guys who have decided that they're men, they live as men because they are men. One of them, 2 days from now, is marrying a woman. So he has done the complete hero's journey of the gender dysphoria sufferer. And I'm incredibly excited for him. I got to meet his fiance last weekend, and I'm just absolutely thrilled that he was able to work his life out like this and now live as normal of a life as he can, whatever that means, given the way that he's lived and the stuff he's had to go through.
So when did you convert to Orthodox Christianity?
So I have been Orthodox for about a little more than 5 years, and I was a Protestant or evangelical, non-denominational, whatever you want to call it, for about a year or a year and a half. Before that, I thought I've said before in videos it was a Wesleyan church because that's what someone there told me. But the more I thought about it, the more I think maybe someone there just told me that they agreed more with Wesley than with Calvin. In terms of free will and, that sort of thing, like the Arminius view versus the Calvinist view. So I'm not sure if it was strictly a Wesleyan or Methodist church or just non-denominational that preferred the Wesleyan flavor, if that makes sense. What about you? So you are a Christian, right? I think.
Essentially, but not, and I mean this term in a positive sense, not dogmatically. I have a particular relationship to belief and dogma where it comes secondary to relationship with the divine. I am definitely a monotheist, though, and Abrahamic in my thought and my thinking and in my practice. But
so when you say Abrahamic, and I'm not trying to turn this into a debate because I know that's not what the conversation is. I'm just asking the question. So Jews, Muslims, and Christians would all consider themselves Abrahamic, but have very different views of God and who he is and his mode of existence. So which of those would you say? So do you believe Jesus is just a rebellious rabbi like Jews do, or a prophet but not God like Muslims do, or God, part of the Godhead like Christians do?
I have not met Jesus, so I haven't. The truth of who Christ is has not been revealed to me personally. I am kind of, I err more toward Islamic, where there's no God but God, and and that there have been certain messengers through time. But in my heart and in the core of my spirituality, it's very Christ-centric. And when I interact with Christianity, especially Catholicism, that's where I feel the most natural sense of fitting in my worship in an outer form.
Okay. So do you go to like different religions, worship services, and just kind of feel them out then?
Well, I'm in a new relationship now. We really want to make spirituality and ergo religion a feature of our relationship, and we're looking for the right fit. I personally prefer Catholicism for some reason. I've not been in a Greek Orthodox church since I was in Bible college in like 1995. We visited, on our explorations.
You were in college in 95?
Yeah, Bible college. I did a year of Bible college after high school.
You must be a lot older than I thought you were if you were in college in 95.
Yeah, I just turned 47. So.
Well, happy birthday.
Pushing 50. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult thing to communicate because it's important for me to only confess to what I know directly. So there's a resonance. I get guidance from God, and within the Christian context, that's when it makes most sense to me. That's where it feels like that's the behavior and the outer form for the internal content. But ultimately, I think that human faith is a container for religious experience and a way for us to communicate and keep ourselves from going off the rails with it. But the inner core is between an individual and Almighty God, the creator and the source, and religion is a way for a person to orient and work toward apotheosis. Is that the term? Some sort
that would be a pagan term.
Yeah, not apotheosis.
Theosis.
Theosis, yeah.
Yeah, apotheosis would be becoming ontologically a God. So becoming the same thing substantially that God is. Whereas for the Orthodox and I don't think Roman Catholics use the term theosis. I think they prefer deification or divinization, but really I think it's the same thing. At least it was the same thing when they were the same church. Theosis for us means that we become God with a little g by being united to God with a big G, but we ourselves do not become a God as if our existence is separate from God or in some way, because we believe that there is no existence without God anyway. So we would say it's impossible to exist at all apart from God. And that's especially true when we're talking about theosis and the afterlife and these things that we can only describe in shadows and figures because we're not there yet,
And why for you did Greek or has Greek Orthodox become your gateway or your container?
So I first have to address the frame of the question, because I think a lot of Western Christians and even people that maybe aren't Christian, they think of Greek Orthodox as the totality of Orthodox Christian. But there are actually 17 different national archdioceses of Orthodox Christianity. I think the number is 17 right now. Some of them are autocephalous, meaning self-governing. Some are under a patriarchate of a different country. So Greek is one national Orthodox church, but there's also Russian, there's Romanian, there's Ukrainian, there's Georgian, there's a Jerusalem patriarchate.
I think I meant Eastern Orthodox then. Right.
Gotcha.
Is that the umbrella? Is that the proper term? So
that tends to be what it's called. Yes.
Okay.
It's called the One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church is the official name. But yeah, so I was actually baptized Greek Orthodox, but I've since switched to another jurisdiction for a number of reasons involving political things going on within the hierarchy of the Greek Orthodox Church and meddling in foreign countries, things of that nature that I didn't support. But to get to your question, I grew up Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed, circumcised, all the rituals, going to Hebrew school, going on my birthright trip to Israel, which is a free trip Jews can go on if they're less than 26 years old. You got to pay for the ticket to New York, but then they'll fly you from New York to Israel for a 10-day all expenses paid trip. Cool experience, right? They didn't show us the Christian stuff, needless to say. But and then the way I lived my life was very evil. I still have a profound amount of evil in the things that I think and the things I feel sometimes. But
evil.
I mean, my actions were very evil. The way I was living, hurting myself and other people spiritually, even though that wasn't my intention. I think it was a byproduct of selfishness and just a lack of virtue and any sort of meaningful moral compass. Like I believed in the basics, you could say, of moral therapeutic. Not deism, because I was an atheist, but you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't rape, you shouldn't kill. I believed all this stuff. I couldn't have grounded it, justified it philosophically if you'd asked me. But I was into the pickup artist subculture. I was very active in the pickup artist world. I was a Freemason for a while. I was into the occult, chaos magic, sex magic, all these sorts of things.
Excuse me. Okay.
Bless you. And I came to a point in my life. I know this is a long answer to your question.
No. Slow down.
Okay.
Yeah. Chaos magic. So from my point of view or my framework is that I did something similar. I followed my will to concentrate my will rather than to surrender myself to God.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And chaos magic was just one of the occult paradigms that I eventually settled on. Which at the time basically just meant that all the other paradigms and systems are just symbols. And as long as the intention is there and you're trying to codify your will or bring your will or your vision into existence, it doesn't matter what symbols or ideas you're using, what vehicle you're using.
Wow, it's kind of like postmodernism then.
Yeah, postmodern occultism, yeah. And I reached a point, there was a specific incident that I probably won't go into great detail on, where I basically got myself through my evil lifestyle into a situation with no good answer, where I had a choice to make, a very binary choice. It's either choice A or choice B. They were both bad choices, and there was really no way out of having to make at least one of the choices. And so I didn't know what to do. And years before this, someone had given me a Bible just out of the kindness of their heart. Actually, I can tell you that part of the story too, because you might find that interesting. So I used to work at Greenpeace in San Diego.
Okay.
I was a canvasser, raising money, fundraiser, knocking door to door, standing in sometimes street corner outside grocery stores. And there was a time outside of, I believe it was a Whole Foods in San Diego or La Jolla, where a woman came out with her kids, and I started doing the Greenpeace pitch. Hey, you like animals, right? Whatever. And she said, oh, no, thank you. I'm a Christian. I'm not interested. And so I said, I was curious. I never heard that objection before, right? And so I said to her, okay, I won't try to pitch you, but I'm curious, can we just talk about that? What is it about being a Christian that would prevent you from signing up for Greenpeace? Don't you believe in shepherding God's creation or something like that? Yeah. And so we got to talking for a while. And I don't remember the exact contents of the conversation, partly because it was beyond my ability to grasp at the time, and partly because I was stoned. I was a pothead back then, so that played into it too. And then she went on about her day, and I didn't think much of it. And then 40 minutes later, she came back. She had gone out and bought a Bible for me and brought it back to me at work, and wrote a nice little note in the cover about it, and something or someone inspired her to do this because she thought it was something that could be helpful to me, that I might be interested in reading it at some point. And I'm even getting a little bit emotional, as I do every time I talk about this story, because this was the first time in my life, I think, that Christ really reached out to me, through this woman. That's how I frame it, think about it. And so I thought, hey, that's cool. It didn't touch me at the time the way it does now in retrospect, looking back. But I put it on my shelf. I didn't look at it for a couple of years. And then when I got myself into this bad situation, I thought, well, I don't know, maybe there's an answer in this book. I've tried everything else I could think of. So I did that thing where I think, okay, I'm going to close my eyes and flip through the pages, and wherever I feel like stopping, and then move my finger on the words on the page, wherever I feel like stopping, maybe that's the thing I'm supposed to do, And it was, my finger ended up on 1 John 4:4. He who is in you is stronger than he who is in the world. And for some reason and in some way that I'll never fully understand, except grace, I suppose, is the best answer, something clicked in me, and I thought, okay, well, if he who is in the world, if the world is his problem that I'm trying to deal with, and he who is in me is Jesus in this context of the Bible, I didn't know much about Jesus besides, the story, he'd been crucified, resurrected, everything. I thought, okay, then maybe that means if I pray to Jesus, he can overcome this problem that I'm having, which I'd never done in my life before. And so for the first time in my life, I prayed to Jesus to help get me through this problem. And nothing bad happened. Nothing bad came of the choice that I made. I ended up making one of the choices I was fully expecting to be, beaten to a bloody pulp, if not worse. And it was fine. Nothing bad happened. And then that was the first time I realized, wait a second, there's something to this Jesus, this Bible. And then I had an experience, I don't know how else to describe it, that kind of showed me how filthy my soul was in a way that transcends my ability to communicate in words.
Yeah.
I understood how filthy I was as the way that I had lived. And so I started going to a Protestant church, just a local one that my friend had been trying to get me to go to for a while. And then they taught me to love the Bible and to pray and who Jesus was and all this stuff. But then after a little while, I started to question some things they were doing there. They had a lot of Israel flags outside the building. They had female pastors. And so I asked the head pastor, who was actually a very well-known guy, the head pastor, he was part of Trump's little prayer circle. I asked him, well, if the Bible says that the church is Israel and that women shouldn't be pastors, why do we do things this way here? I wasn't trying to start a fight with him. I was just curious. And he said, because this is my church and we do things my way here.
Okay.
And I thought, that's a really bad answer,
Okay.
And so I started looking for something more traditional that was more about biblical morality, is how I would have put it to myself at the time. And then a friend of mine, who sadly has kind of gone off the deep end, and I don't think is really Orthodox anymore, but I'm not sure, said you should check out Orthodox Christianity, which I never heard of before. And I was probably about 27, 28 at this time. I'm 36 now. And so I Googled it, and there was a Greek Orthodox church about 4 minutes up the road. And so I went and then went through the process of being what's called an inquirer and then a catechumen. And then I was baptized on Pentecost in May of 2018. And that was 5 years ago.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a very long answer to your short question, but
I want to make the answer even longer. What was the feedback mechanism of knowing that this was for you?
So at first I really didn't. When I first went to an Orthodox church and I saw the icons all over the wall, especially the big icon of Saint Mary, the Mother of God, the Theotokos, as the Orthodox call her, I was actually quite horrified, because as a Protestant, I'd been taught that this sort of thing was idolatry, that it was graven images. I heard the prayers, Most Holy Theotokos, save us. We're praying to saints, asking for their prayers and for them to, help us. And as a Protestant, it had really been drilled into me, this presupposition that we don't do anything like this, that Christians don't do this. This is all like Roman Catholicism became a pagan religion, and this Orthodox thing kind of looked like that. And so I had a lot of kind of Protestant presuppositions that I worked through very slowly, through debating with people online and then pointing things out to me in scripture I'd never seen before, pointing out to me what ancient church buildings looked like and ancient synagogues, which are covered in icons all over the walls. And so I eventually, over that course of time, all of my objections were kind of turned down. But even though I had all these objections, there was just something there that I couldn't put my finger on. I felt like I'd stepped into something ancient and traditional and meaningful. And since I had left that Protestant church, specifically because I felt like it was not rooted in anything traditional, besides the pastor's opinion at that point, that resonated with me deeply. And then I was very smarter than I am now, because I avoided the Orthodox internet back as an inquirer and catechumen. I wasn't on Twitter or anything like that. My friends told me avoid the Orthodox internet, but I would watch some YouTube videos, and I found Father Josiah Trenum on YouTube, and I was really blown away by him. And so I drove up from San Diego to Riverside to meet him, and I got about 15, 20 minutes of time with him one-on-one, and I was just so impressed. I thought, well, even if I don't understand everything about Orthodoxy, if this is the kind of man that Orthodoxy turns you into,
Okay.
then I want to be Orthodox and get some of what Father Josiah has.
Yeah. There's that term that we brought up, theosis. Is there also like a relative term for soul purification, or because you brought up
Yeah,
how dirty you saw yourself, and does that not initiate a process of purification or rectification? What is that?
it certainly does. So the Orthodox paradigm is typically communicated in three stages, which are not discrete in the sense that one begins at an
Yeah.
exact moment where another one ends. There's overlap and back and forth between them. But purification is really the first stage for us, which is overcoming the passions,
Yes.
adopting an ascetic rule of life, a prayer rule, the church fasts. First of all, understanding what sin is in the first place,
Yeah.
and then once you understand what it is, genuinely, deeply desiring to overcome it, and learning how to work with the tools the church offers, which is to say that God offers, in order to overcome those more external sins, which of course purification also involves a lot of internal purification, because ideally you don't have errant thoughts or feelings. Christ says, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. And that sentence is kind of our spiritual life in a nutshell, or at least the ideal. So as we work through these passions, the idea is that at a point, but again, not a discrete point necessarily, so it's not the best language, the illumination phase is after purification, but also during, where the Holy Spirit really starts to indwell you more, and your communion with God, your spiritual communion with God, really starts to deepen.
Yeah.
And then at the level of theosis is really what the saints have attained, where they start to take on some of the traits of God, some of the gifts of God, like clairvoyance, or there are monks on Mount Athos that are invisible unless they choose not to be. There are people that will travel 1,000 miles to Mount Athos, and a monk will tell them exactly why they're there, what they were thinking about, or will address a situation that monk couldn't possibly have known about. Or they'll say, oh, I've been waiting for you. Here, let me show you the thing you came here for. Or they will speak in Greek, and the other person will hear them speaking in whatever their native language is. So
Yeah.
those kinds of gifts are really reserved for those who are very advanced in the spiritual life.
Okay.
But that deification or theosis, and this is a process that continues after death, as far as I'm aware. It's not like the theosis that our saints attain here is as low of a gift they're going to get when they're in the afterlife. It's going to be much greater in the afterlife. But of course, this is, again, we're starting to speak of things that we can't actually grasp or communicate while we're still in the flesh.
Absolutely. So could we compare and contrast the method or the path that is presented to you in Greek Orthodoxy, Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy? Compare and contrast that to the magic, like the chaos magic, and like how it differs. What's the difference between apotheosis and theosis, right? What's the different paths between magnifying yourself and then proceeding on this path where you're hoping to gain some sort of greater state of being? Are they not?
Yeah.
They're both aspirational, but
Yeah.
the method is very different.
I would say ultimately one of them is true and one of them is a lie. The lie that you are going to become a god by sharpening and hardening your own will and learning to be a master of the world, master of your environment, master of money and women and power, that's going to turn you into a god, is a lie. What it's going to do is send you to hell. And there's different Orthodox ways of understanding what hell is, but and then the people that have that are already living in hell. If you actually look into their eyes and see what kind of lives they live, and you see how utterly enslaved they are to their own desires. And I'll use a contemporary example with the caveat I've never actually seen any of his videos. But I know Andrew Tate is a very popular character in men's self-help and whatnot, in what we at least used to call the manosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
secular self-help. And this is a guy that thinks he's become very powerful. He compared himself to Genghis Khan because people Google him a lot on the internet, which I thought was funny. Or maybe before he goes to prison, at least, thinks he has all this power and women and money. He's become a god, a man amongst men. But he's actually living an extremely feminine way of life, a feminine mode of life, as St. Gregory of Nyssa would describe it in his book Life of Moses, in the sense that he is just utterly enslaved to his own basest instincts and he has no self-control. His whole character that he has cultivated and presents and teaches is meant to gratify lower impulses and base instincts. This is what the church would call the feminine mode of living, the secular shadow of masculinity that is not masculine. The masculine mode of living is rationality and virtue and dispassion and self-control. And this is true whether we're talking about a male or female saint. They would still say the feminine mode of life would be the passionate mode of life as opposed to dispassionate mode. And so you can see that this man who thinks he's a god is now potentially going to prison for sex trafficking, because the devil is a liar. When the devil says, hey, you can become a god, ultimately he's tricking you, right? Because he just wants you not to humble yourself, not to have self-control, not to worship Christ, not to worship God, right? And so the difference is that one of them, and on top of that, I'll say another difference, is there's no sense of moral purification in the occult world at all. Because occultism is essentially, I call it a chew toy for the over-intelligent in one of my books. It's just a way of getting more of what you want. Right? There's no moral code attached to it. And some of the occultists, the big name philosophers, attached some kind of moral code to it, or some pseudo moral code to it, like the Church of Satan or the Temple of Satan. What's it called? I think it's called the Church of Satan. Officially teaches a very kind of secular humanistic morality. But of course, that has nothing to do with chastity or with the regeneration of the inner person, the way that Christianity teaches, right? Christianity is not a behaviorist religion. We don't teach that you're a good person because you don't do bad things. Because someone can be a prolifically wicked person, but with a good degree of self-control and not act on those impulses. Well, that's not what Christ is calling us to, right? That's why Christ says, blessed are the pure in heart. Why he says, don't be a whitewashed tomb, something that looks really virtuous on the outside, but is dead and decaying inside. So it's an entirely different paradigm. I would actually say it's the polar opposite paradigm, apotheosis versus theosis.
So I knew we were going to get back to gender. If Mary is featured centrally, or at least prominently, not centrally, but prominently in the church, and yet there is a categorization of masculine good, feminine not as good or bad, how does the image of Mary take that contradiction and purify it? Or another way of asking a similar question, how are women taught to be Christ-like through the iconography and through the feminine divine? If the feminine is thought of as passionate and the male dispassionate, then how are there female saints? How does one as a woman attain a femininity that isn't subservient or of a lesser order to the masculine?
That's a good question. So if you look through church history, you will find saints that explicitly said that women are sort of less than men ontologically, but the church has not adopted that teaching as a whole. So for us, men and women are both created in the image and likeness of God. They can both become saints, obviously. And when I say that feminine is the passionate mode of life, again, I'm specifically referring to St. Gregory of Nyssa's imagery in his book, The Life of Moses, which is a phenomenal book that everybody should read. When was it written,
if you recall?
Gregory of Nyssa, 4th century, I would say. And so what The Life of Moses is, just to give you background to why I'm using the feminine masculine language. So he goes through the history of the life of Moses in the Old Testament in book 1 of The Life of Moses. And then in book 2, he extracts spiritual meaning and wisdom from the events of the life of Moses, the historical Moses. So, for example, when Pharaoh seeks to kill all of the young boys, right? This is when Moses' mother puts him in the basket into the river, and he ends up in the royal court. So Pharaoh trying to kill off all the young boys. St. Gregory of Nyssa interprets Pharaoh, first of all, or the Egyptians in general, the Egyptian way of life, as the satanic life, as the tyrant, right? The accuser, the evil one that seeks to snuff out lives and souls. And so by going after the boys, the young boys. St. Gregory extracts from this the idea that Satan seeks to kill virtue, rationality, self-control, dispassion from the soul of man. And so that's why he brings up that specific imagery, that the killing of the young boys is indicative of the killing of virtue that Satan or Pharaoh seeks to impose on the world. And his whole book, Life of Moses, is doing that sort of symbolic, allegorical type of reading. So that's probably why those words are fresh in my mind, is because I'm reading the Life of Moses, rereading the Life of Moses right now. But when I say masculine or feminine mode of life, according to St. Gregory, that is not related to being a boy or a girl, if that makes sense. So like a woman who is completely enslaved to her own desires, which is somewhat similar but also somewhat different from a man. Like women have the need for attention, I think, in a way that men don't have, especially with TikTok, OnlyFans, putting pictures of themselves on the internet for people to ogle over. That's not really something most men do, right? But it's still a base instinct, a base desire for some material reward. But if that woman becomes a saint and lives in chastity and humility and asceticism, would still be overcoming that feminine, passionate mode of life. So I don't want you to get too hung up on my use of masculine and feminine in that regard, because I'm not making a statement about the value of men or women. I'm just telling you what this imagery that a saint uses that I found useful.
Similarly, relatedly, and in a callback to the beginning of our conversation, what about the church's expression of sexuality or thinking on sexuality, homosexuality versus heterosexuality, and then heterosexuality versus something greater than just a man and a woman having sex, right? Like there's got to be a content. So what's the teaching, I guess, is the question.
So in the ancient church, monasticism, which is to say celibacy, was typically seen as a higher spiritual virtue than marriage, simply because, like St. Paul says, the monks, the celibates, live only for God, whereas a married person has to worry about logistical things, right? How do I pay the bills? How do I keep my spouse happy? How do I this or that? Or, they have all kinds of concerns that a monk doesn't, a monk who has no possessions and no spouse and nothing to worry about in a worldly sense besides the tasks given to him by his abbot. And St. John Chrysostom is probably the main expounder of the transition from that belief to the view, once he became a parish priest, that married people, if they live in a holy way, can equal the virtue of the monastics. And of course, married people that live in a holy way are much holier than monks who don't live in a holy way. So it's not like the station itself grants you anything. You can be a holy or unholy monk, you can be a holy or unholy spouse. But overall, it was the monks writing about the virtue of virginity and chastity, because that's how they lived. They thought, I don't have to worry about all this other stuff. But then when they encountered real communities of people in a parish, like St. John Chrysostom, when he did this, he saw the struggles married people had and the piety that they had. And so eventually the teaching came to be that monks and married people can be equally saints. And we have many married saints. We have a whole book of married saints called The Lives of Married Saints by David and Mary Ford. It's a really good book. Some of those married people, those married couples, did become monastics in their later years. Once the kids were out of the house, they'd go either to the same or to different monasteries, and from then on not live as if they were husband and wife anymore, obviously, in terms of sexuality. But as regards homosexuality, I think it's easy to view Christian teaching as being anti-homosexuality, anti-LGBT. And in a sense, that's true. But I don't think it's so much anti-LGBT as it is pro-human, pro-ideal. Because our being against certain things is a byproduct of our being for certain things, if that makes sense. So it's not like Christ came to preach against sodomites just because he didn't like them. It's because they were acting against the order of nature, against that image of God, that likeness of God that each one of us has in ourselves. So the ideal is to live according to our true nature, which is the image and likeness of God. And any deviation from that is seen as errant and sinful. Just like it's seen as sinful for unmarried people, man and woman, to be having sex with each other. We call that fornication. Now, the saints didn't see that as bad of a sin as sodomy, because sodomy is against nature, and fornication with the opposite sex is at least a sin according to nature. But still, the Bible makes it clear that sexual sins are the only sin that you do like outside the body that affects your body too. St. Paul talks about this a lot, that it's a very profound and mortal sin, whether it's fornication outside of marriage or whether you're engaged in homosexual activity.
This is before they had drug abuse too. That's just one example that I was thinking about, something that you do with your body.
Drunkenness, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, drunkenness. Okay, of course, it's already there. Human beings have been fucking up. Sorry, pardon me, but for eternity.
Hey, it's your show. You could say what you want on your show.
How do we derive an order? This thing called the order of nature. How is that derived specifically with? In a partner relationship in a marriage, how is that seen as the order of nature? Is it because it produces babies? Is that why? Like, how do we hang the order of nature? How do we say that this is the ideal? Like, where's that first hook?
So now you're getting into very deep topics that are rather controversial in some circles.
Oh, cool.
Because let me put it this way. So in the Orthodox world, there are people who will say that after a husband and wife are past childbearing age, they should no longer have sex with each other because it's no longer able to fulfill that particular command to be fruitful and multiply, and things of that nature. There are others who, and some couples do, like they won't engage in sexual relationships for a couple days before or after they take communion. They won't engage in it when the woman is pregnant for various reasons. And so as far as I know, there isn't a specific canon, which is kind of our pastoral guidelines on this. There might be, I might just not know about it. But this is one of those areas where we would say, ask your priest, ask your spiritual father about that sort of thing. Now, that said, I am probably in the minority, unfortunately, of Orthodox Christians who am adamantly against the use of birth control of any kind. There are Orthodox Christians and priests who agree with that. Father Josiah Trento, of course, agrees with that. There is no example of a saint in 2,000 years of history that approved of birth control. But a lot of priests will approve of birth control for people in their parish, which I disagree with. I don't know if my own priest does it for other couples because it's not a concern for me and my wife. We're against it. We're not going to use it because the argument, and I think it's a bad argument, is people will say, well, the world's getting more expensive. The economy's going crazy. Who can afford kids? And my response to that is, well, what do you know about your situation that God doesn't know? Like, what are you aware of as far as your provisioning that God doesn't know? Because I believe that whether and when you have children and how many is providential. I believe that's up to God. And so if he gives you a child and then you're following God and living the way he says, then he will take care of you and open a way for you, even if you aren't aware of it at the moment. Whereas trying to take control over your own functions and over the outcome of your marriage, to me, is a lack of trust in God. But I'm glad I'm not a priest and I don't have to have this conversation with people because no one has to listen to me. It's the nice thing about being a layperson. Nobody has to listen to me or agree with me on anything, really.
Well, there's just a contradiction here between taking control over your own functions and taking control over your own functions. If you're called to be disciplined and to control your own functions, like where does it slide into hubris? Where does it slide into God's domain?
Well, I'm saying if you're using artificial means to prevent yourself from having children, that's not the same as like fasting from sexuality on fasting days or fasting from sex during Lent, which I think is a healthy practice to not have sex on fasting days. Because the whole point of the fasting days is to die to our desires and be ascetic, right? But again, this is something for different Christians to speak about with their priests, and people are in different places, and what might be a good teaching for one person might not for another, depending on what the priest knows about that person. I just know that I don't think I'm ever going to become a priest, but if I were, I would not be allowing birth control or promoting it.
You dropped the term piety when you're talking about the lives of the married saints, like people who live with piety. What is the content of piety? What does that mean, like both internally and externally?
I would say just doing your best to follow the commandments and repenting when you fail is probably the best definition I can give of that. Because really, we're all less pious than we should be, right? None of us really maybe I'm just telling on myself and saying none of us, but I do believe that. I don't think any of us is following the commandments as well as we should be, or taking them as seriously as we should be. Those people are the saints, and even they will tell you they're not taking it as seriously as they should. It's kind of a characteristic of a saint, in fact, to be humble about it. Excuse me. But living a pious life, reading spiritual readings, the Bible, the lives of the saints, things of that nature, avoiding impious things that darken your nous, your spiritual organ, avoiding, pornography and nightclubs. I don't think you can be a very pious person if you're exposing your senses to things that are leading you away from Christ. And it's a topic of growth throughout the course of your life. Like when I was a Protestant, there were things that I didn't know were not very Christian to do, that I had to learn one step at a time. I had no idea. I'd never set foot in a church before, except maybe once on like a Hebrew school trip to see what a Catholic church was like. I don't think I'd ever been in a church besides that. So I didn't know, I didn't know anything about the scriptures, what's a sin, what isn't. All I knew was that something I was doing had made my soul very filthy. And then so I started slowly trying to change my life according to what I was learning, to become more pious, right? To become closer to Christ. It's a lifelong process for everybody.
I don't know how to articulate this question, so if you just forgive me for stumbling through this, but it appears to me that you're an intellectual human being. So you go and you learn all this stuff about Judaism, and then you go and you learn all this stuff about Magick or Greenpeace, like you're always intellectually engaged, and then you go into the Protestant thing, and when you become a Christian, you don't just practice it. It seems like you engage with your mind. You engage with it on an intellectual level. So I'm wondering, like, particular to Orthodoxy, how does the life of the mind, or how do you use your mind and your intellect as an extension of worship or as a preparation of worship? Like the relationship between thinking through these things, reading these things, writing about these things. How does that form a facet of your spiritual life? And how does Orthodoxy and its canon suit you in that?
Well, I think if I was a true intellectual, I would have known what time this show was supposed to start, so we can rule that out off the bat.
I don't know. Intellectuals are famously like not empty-headed, but like minded, something minded.
Absent-minded.
Absent-minded, yeah.
All right, I'll go with that. I think you're correct. I'm an all-in type of person. So when I'm into something, I'm all the way into it. I study it. I want to understand it. I want to know what I'm doing and talking about. But I really think that intelligence is a double-edged sword when it comes to godly topics. I really do. I think that a simple illiterate peasant can have a simple faith and love of God that leads them to greater heights of virtue and much faster than someone who is like me with my nose stuck in a book trying to logically work out theological problems is going to attain. On the other side of that sword is that once I have a grasp of something, or feel that I have a grasp of something, I've been blessed by my spiritual father to talk about stuff, then I think intelligence and studying can be useful because you can articulate things to other people. Not that the simple person can't. The illiterate person can lead others to God just by way of example, right? By seeing how that person lives. And you could easily argue that's a much better apologetic, is actually being holy yourself, right? But for those of us who are not yet holy, but can at least talk about holiness and articulate what it's supposed to be like on paper, it can help with guiding other people down the right path and helping them avoid some of the mistakes that I fell into. Like I used to be a Freemason, like I mentioned, and then ended up writing a book for priests and pastors to help them understand why Freemasonry and Christianity are not compatible, which then they can give to parishioners that are Masons and don't understand what's wrong with it, for example. So that kind of thing with apologetics, it can be helpful when the person in question has has a mind that's engaged in philosophy and theology, and they need to be persuaded out of one system into another system, or to see the errors of a paradigm, I feel that study can be helpful in that regard. But it can, again, maybe it's a triple-edged sword. I can't conceptualize the triple-edged sword, but I'm going to go with it. Yeah, and then there's also the pride that comes with that, with being a well-read person. It's very easy to slip into pride and look down on people who don't read as much as you do. But I guess that's true for any endeavor in life too, right? Like the plumber probably looks down on people that have a hard time figuring out which way to turn the knob to get hot or cold water. So maybe it's a byproduct of intelligence, as it is specialty in any field, any endeavor.
What's the Orthodox stance on bearing witness or evangelizing? Like, what are you prompted to do with regard to bringing your belief system to the greater world? And then how do you follow through on that? Is it an individual basis or?
I think Orthodoxy has really dropped the ball on evangelism. We have a great commission to make disciples of the world and baptize everyone in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And until relatively recently, I hadn't heard of Orthodoxy until I was 27 or 28. That's a failure on the church's part and it's something that's bothered me since I became Orthodox. You go down to the mall, there's Planned Parenthood. They have a table, right? They have a booth, they have flyers, they have pamphlets. They're trying to talk to the public. Jehovah's Witnesses are out there. Mormons are showing up at your door, right? They ride their bike to your door. Where are we? Where are we? People have called Orthodoxy America's best kept secret, and they laugh about it. And I think, why is that funny? Do you believe that your faith is salvific? Do you believe it's the true church established by Christ and the apostles? If so, why would you want to hide that from people? Why would you want that to be a secret? Why wouldn't you go out and do it? Our church has all this history of great saints evangelizing entire nations. In the case of St. Cyril and Methodius, inventing an entire alphabet just to evangelize and just to show the gospel with the Slavic people. We had the Russian Orthodox go to Alaska. That was the first Orthodoxy in America, except for, I think, one guy in Virginia, but that wasn't like an evangelistic mission. When the Russian Orthodox went to Alaska, they learned the native language to translate scripture, to translate spiritual books. And the natives loved them. They loved Saint Herman and Saint Innocent, these monks, these Orthodox monks in Alaska. And after that, there hasn't been a whole lot in this country until the rise of the internet, it seems. And so that is also a double-edged sword, because then you get everyone with a camera and a desire to go out and talk, like myself, out there saying things, but I'm not a purified, illumined, deified person. I'm not a clergyman of any sort. And so you get the situation where you have all these lay people apologetics channels popping up. And even if there's good content there, it's still marred by our passions, right? By our own errors and flaws that we haven't worked out in the church yet. But we're only there because the clergy aren't, and it's their job and not ours. So in a ideal situation, it would be the bishops that, like they used to, engaging with the public figures of the day, exposing the heresies of the major figures of the day. Our bishops are silent, almost universally silent on these topics. There's so many people on YouTube with giant audiences, millions and millions of people, leading people away from Christ, and our bishops have nothing to say about it. Back in the day, St. Augustine would have written at least 3 books against every single one of those people. So I don't know what happened. And now you have clergy sort of complaining, and maybe with some justification, about the rise of these lay apologetics channels, but they're missing the point that it's their fault we're doing this. Because if they were doing it, we wouldn't be doing it. So I think ideally apologetics would be left to purified clergy, illumined clergy. And thankfully there are some that are now starting to kind of right the direction of the ship a little bit, like Father Josiah Trenum, Father Turbo Qualls, Father Spiridon Bailey, and others who are out there with popular channels, thank God, popular content. And I just really wish it was the bishops doing it, because they're the ones that I think probably should be.
Yeah. I was just speaking with Charles Haywood a couple days ago. He is the writer of Worthy House. He does a lot of book reviews. He's a really pugilistic, cantankerous individual, and great stuff. Very right-wing, very stolidly right-wing. But we spoke about his Christianity because he bases things on Christianity. I'm like, well, what kind of Christianity is Orthodox? I'm like, well, why Orthodox? He's like, feels to him that it's unmarred by Westernism, by Western progressivism. It's kind of like has a time capsule quality to it. It's not corrupted by certain things, the progressive movement that, broadly speaking, not American progressivism, but just the constant Western need to progress in some direction. And I'm wondering if that's not a double-edged sword too. You have this faith that was brought over here probably just by ethnic communities, so it wasn't evangelized by other things, and so it was kind of kept apart. It was set apart. It was kind of a great kept secret, and because it was kept secret, it didn't have this influx of influence, and now it can come of age like a little bit staggered. So I'm wondering if that rings true to you, that this is like stepping into Orthodoxy. There's a way of like kind of going back in time in a sense, like, when we talk about politics, if we could just bring it back to the 90s or the 50s or the 1880s or before, the Enlightenment, before Martin Luther, if we could just keep on bringing it back, if this is like one way of going back to an earlier state, that might be actually not just simpler, but more direct and less leavened by modernity. And if that's so, then how does one go there and then bring it out into the world without inducing some sort of exchange of the, pollutants outside of it?
Well, to answer your last question first, I think we should be extremely traditional with our beliefs and extremely modern in how we communicate them. I think we should take advantage of all the tools available to evangelize. Okay. I don't think if we're going to be hyper traditionalists, like I will only do apologetics by written scroll on papyrus, like, well, why? You're kind of missing the point. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to start a TikTok channel anytime soon or anything like that. I'm a little too old, I think, for that. But I don't really engage with the hyper anti-Western polemic the way some Orthodox do. However, that tends to be in a slightly different direction than what you were talking about, which is the inoculation from Western progressivism, which of course I'm completely against. And we really are the poisoners of the world with this gender ideology and LGBT ideology and spreading democracy to people that don't want it because they understand what it really means, which is not what we're told it means. Democracy, I think, means rule by the media. And a lot of people, even countries that we consider simpler or third world, they kind of understand that better than a lot of people here do. They understand what the elite mean by democracy. And I do think there is a largely an inoculation against that, only in the sense that when it starts to be promoted, that branch will eventually be cut off. We're seeing some of that with the Greek Orthodox Church, unfortunately. The Archbishop of the United States was marching with the Black Lives Matter recently, wearing a mask. He presided over a very famous, very well-publicized baptism of a child of a gay couple in Greece against the wishes of his bishop. He actually lied to his bishop about what he was doing. And things of that nature, unfortunately, do happen. So it's not like every member of Orthodoxy is automatically immune from these satanic currents.
Hold on. Like I'm sorry to pause you here.
No, not at all.
How is Black Lives Matter satanic? That's not what you're saying right now.
No, that is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I would consider it a satanic.
Let's get into it.
You want to get into
it? Yeah.
I'm trying so hard to not turn this video
Let's get spicy. Let's get spicy.
Okay.
We're 40 minutes in. People are ready for this.
See, if I wanted to debate, I would have started with the religion versus relationship, the dogma versus relationship earlier, but I passed over that in silence to maintain a charitable conversation. I don't think Black Lives Matter is, first of all, I think it's brilliant marketing to call it that. It's like, well, let me ask you a question to start off the spiciness. If I called my movement Puppies Are Cute and I went around murdering old people, would you be a supporter of Puppies Are Cute?
No.
You don't think puppies are cute?
Yeah.
See the game I just did?
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Okay.
I think Black Lives Matter, the movement, is based on falsification of statistics, propaganda. And of course, it's made its main proponents filthy rich, who took all the donations to the movement and then bought a bunch of mansions for themselves while
Well,
doing
not
absolutely
to
nothing.
mention the Democratic Party.
Communities.
It's using that as a money laundering scheme, too.
Well, of course. So do you agree with me that it's satanic and you just didn't want to bring it up, or are you disagree
Well,
with
okay, I don't disagree with you. I just wanted to
okay.
seek a little clarification. So on that level, from that to the bishop, like how is the bishop wrong in wearing a mask and marching with Black Lives Matter? Because he's putting the seal of approval on this, and how is he mistaken in what he's doing? Like, I guess, what's the relationship between American racial politics and the Orthodox Church? Right? And how is he trying to bridge that gap? Or
well, I don't think he was trying to bridge the gap at all. I think he was planting a flag firmly on one side of the gap.
Okay.
I think that by having an Orthodox bishop dressed in his vestments, marching with this hyper-partisan, hyper-violent group, and I know people say it was mostly peaceful. I still remember the clip where the reporter was saying mostly peaceful protests while there was a building on fire behind him in the clip.
Classic.
It was amazing to watch. I call it satanic, first of all, because its founders have openly admitted that they're into the occult, that there's an occult ideology involving communication with spirits. They're public about this. And of course, the spirits they're talking about are not the saints and the Holy Spirit. It's their, tribal spirits, which Christians would refer to as demons. And so they're also Marxists. Of course, Karl Marx famously dedicated his work to Lucifer in at least one of his books. And so there's the ideological, philosophical, satanic aspect of it. And for me, if something is against truth, then it's against God, because God is truth, and hence something built on a lie is fundamentally satanic. I'm not saying Black Lives Matter is going around with a Baphomet head and upside down pentagram flags, but it kind of looks the same to me. There's a black priest named Father Moses Berry, who would go to Black Lives Matter rallies, vested as a priest, and he would talk to people there. And what he would tell them is, I think he would try and empathize with their racial grievances, even though I don't agree with the grievances that they're promoting. He would empathize with that, but then also point out this group that you're part of also promotes abortion. It also supports Planned Parenthood. It also supports all these other things. So it's not like there's just this one racial aspect of it, these progressive movements. It's always tied in with everything else, right? That's what we see. Like feminism, another movement I would say is not based on truth and is fundamentally anti-God. It's not just about, equal pay for equal work. It's also, again, abortion. It's also whatever it is the left is pushing. Even though, ironically, the same feminists who open the door for all these narratives, some of them are starting to say, well, now you guys are going too far with all this transgender stuff. Like now real women are being oppressed by all this. I say, well, maybe you shouldn't have gotten the ball rolling then by fighting against the patriarchy in the first place when we were the ones protecting the country from all this nonsense to begin with. But I don't believe the Black Lives Matter movement is... I think it's a lie, and I think the people that are promoting it know it's a lie. That's the part that bugs me. I don't think they're wrong. I don't think they're just wrong that Michael Brown held up his hands, this innocent boy said, please don't shoot, hands up. They know that's not true, right? And they fabricated a whole narrative around that to aggravate these people that believed it, and then got very angry, and understandably so. If that were true, that would be something worth getting angry about, and I would totally empathize. But they weaponized this community, they weaponized the black community to use as a battering ram against the white community. That's what I think Black Lives Matter is. The weaponization of the black community by telling them lies that get them understandably angry, and then saying, go do your thing, you're not going to have consequences, you're free to go loot and burn and murder and whatever, as we saw with the Summer of Love in 2020. And then Donald Trump, who I no longer support largely because of this, then rewarded them with $500 billion for their efforts, which is not how I would have handled that situation.
Huh. Wait, what's this $500 billion?
The Platinum Plan that he came up with. He didn't directly reward them, but are you familiar with the concept of Dane Geld?
Dane Guild? No.
Dane Geld.
Yeah.
So basically, in Europe, the Vikings would raid villages and countries, and the concept of the Dane Geld was that if you give them money, they'll stop raiding. So kings would pay the Dane Geld to prevent the raids, which of course just encouraged the Vikings to raid more and then demand more money to stop. So I think Trump paid the day in Guild on that one. When Black Lives Matter was rioting, he said, wait, have $500 billion. Here you go. Please stop. And it's a tough situation, but I think that you asked about the Orthodox view of racial politics, which is a very loaded question, a very difficult question. We see everybody is created in the image and likeness of God. I believe that we would promote the idea, even though many will disagree, that it's okay to have an ethnic community, for a community to be concerned with its own interests, as long as it does not turn into a hatred of or violence against other ethnic communities. We can't let love of neighbor turn into a hatred of others, I would say, is the Orthodox view. Yeah. But it also doesn't mean you can't love your neighbor. I don't think Orthodoxy on any dogmatic level would promote this idea that it's wrong for white people to want to not be slandered constantly in the media or killed with impunity and without consequence or anything like that, like what's being promoted by our culture. There are, of course, priests that will say that, but I think they are taken in by the spirit of modernism, the spirit of the age to some degree. Sorry, go ahead.
Just bringing up the spirit of modernism, and to ask an earlier question with that term, like, how does the Orthodox protect itself from modernity? How do you know when the form and the process are different? Like, how do you know that the internet isn't essentially something that's, sorry to use this term, just turning it up to 11, satanic in and of itself, while we're using the internet right now to communicate?
I thought you were apologizing for the term turning it up to 11. I said, that's from Spinal Tap. You don't have to apologize for Spinal Tap. So we have thousands of years of councils and canons and dogmas that don't change and will never change and have never changed. That's how we are able to be inoculated from modernism when people follow them. Now, does that mean that all of our bishops and priests and other clergy follow them? Of course not. People don't always bother to find out what they say, or they might find out and disagree with it for a number of reasons. But the fact that we are rooted in this tradition that goes back to the beginning prevents us from being changed, which is, to me, one of the major appeals of Orthodoxy, is that it's never going to change. Now, like I said, if one group starts changing, it's eventually going to be cut off. Like Christ talks about the branches being cut off and not groomed. What's the word?
Pruned.
Pruned. There you go. I know it sounded like that. Sorry, we were talking about trannies earlier, so the word groomed was on my mind. But when people follow what our teachings actually are, that protects us from modernity, which of course makes us seem very alien and ancient and bizarre to the modern West, right? Now, most people don't even know we exist. They just know, I think most people can conceive of it as Christians and Catholics in terms of the Christian world in America. Most people have no idea who we are. And then when they find out about us, they go, oh, it's like Catholics, but with beards, which is, that is one true thing about us. But it's greatly appealing to me to know that there's something that has lasted for 2,000 years, that has never changed its fundamental teachings, that is something we can be rooted in. It's like an anchor for the ship of life, to be on solid ground there, right? The house built with rock, as Jesus would call it, not the house built with sand. In fact, I was just arguing with James White on Twitter a couple of days ago. I've been trying to get him to engage with me for a while because he's refused to engage with the Orthodox Christians. He likes to do these little drive-by attacks without ever talking to us. I finally got under his skin enough for him to respond to me, and then he was criticizing Orthodoxy for being fossilized. It's a fossilized faith. And where I see that as a great thing. Certain aspects of it are fossilized. The dogmas are not going to change. And if you look at the fruits of the Protestant Reformation, it's a clown show. You have tens of thousands of denominations doing whatever they want, all claiming to just be going by the simple teachings of Scripture. So maybe there's some value to that fossilization in terms of not becoming the roller skate cloud masses that we see in some other denominations.
Why do you speak, or what are you called to speak to? What do you end up engaging with, like when you are on Twitter and when you're writing? Like what are you following out? What are you fleshing out? What's your work, I guess?
So when I started doing I think of it as a ministry. What I really wanted to do was help other people who were in the situations I used to be in, which was particularly Jews, occultists, and pickup artists.
Oh.
Now, through my last 5 or more years of doing this, I know very few Jewish converts. It's very difficult. It has to be a movement of God, because Jews are raised in a way that's more specifically anti-Christian, I think, than a lot of other people are. Like there's a whole different angle, there's a whole different aspect of it. Like it's either Messiah or not for my people. For occultists, thank God, people reach out to me relatively regularly who are Freemasons and thinking about leaving or something like that, where I've been able to help them, which is incredibly gratifying. And as far as pickup artists, I don't know if that even exists anymore. At least the way that it used to, when guys would go to clubs and bars. Someone would go out 6 nights a week, spend thousands of hours at nightclubs trying out different lines, different moves, what works, what doesn't. I don't know if that's a thing anymore. I was saying on a recent interview that I did that I think that COVID and masks and social distancing really probably destroyed that community. The whole Me Too movement also had a very severe impact on that community, because all of a sudden, this thing that all these guys were doing, there was a real danger. You were going to be on camera and someone's going to accuse you of something you weren't doing, right? And there were some guys in that world that were bad guys, frankly, that were hurting women and doing things they should have been doing. But even the idea of going up to a woman at a mall and starting a conversation, even that could have been seen at a certain point as some kind of sexual harassment, which of course really comes down to whether or not she likes it, finds you attractive. But that's an entirely different conversation. Yeah. If you're charming, they don't mind, they like it. Yeah. If you're not, they're weirded out. But you got to weird them out a little bit to get to the point where you know what not to do, I suppose. So, but I don't think guys are doing that the way that they used to in the heyday of Mystery and that show on VH1 and all that.
What attracted you to that lifestyle or that game?
It was a challenge with a reward that I enjoyed. Of course, now I cringe looking back at all that stuff, and I feel horrible about it. I thought I was the man. I thought I was so cool, that I was so much better than all these other guys that didn't have the choices and the options I had. And of course, looking back, I was doing the best I could with what I knew at the time. But now, being an Orthodox Christian, knowing what I was missing by living that way, it was absurd for me to do that.
What were you missing?
Peace, fulfillment, joy, sobriety, God. Short answer. Yeah. St. Augustine has a great quote where he says, "There is a hole in the heart of man that only God can fill." And so I was living from that hole in my heart. I was trying to fill it with drugs and women and whatever, because when you're empty like that, you need something to fill it. But then when God is there, you don't need those things anymore, because you're already full in a way that you never approached when you were living that facsimile of a life that I was living before.
What's the difference?
And I'm not the only one either, because Roosh was a big pickup artist. He's an Orthodox Christian now too. He was a major figure in the pickup artist world. Good friend of mine, and completely changed. His forum shut down his old website. This is Roosh V, if you're not familiar with him. Doesn't have much of an internet presence anymore besides the articles that he writes, but he was even worse than I was. He would go to other countries and write books about how to sleep with the women there, how to sleep with women in Iceland and Denmark and whatever. Okay. Really dedicated his life to it, and has done a total 180.
What's the difference between women and a woman? Like one of the benefit of having a wife. And I asked that because one aspect of the conversation that isn't being promoted and that young men need to understand is the positives of sacrificing immediate pleasure, sacrificing conquest for stability. And it's the world wants us to be roaming, and our desires want us to seek novelty, and that sounds like a huge sacrifice, and it's not really promoted like the other side of that. Like, when you sacrifice that, what do you gain?
Those are some really, really good questions. I totally agree with you. There was that kind of endless search for novelty, like being the eternal child that needs something new and something shiny. And and you're never fulfilled, because then once you have one thing, now you just want a new thing. And there's so many positives to monogamous marriage and whatnot. I mean, first of all, you're living more in accordance with what you were made to be by God in the first place, which brings its own enormous reward of grace and stability into your life. When you're living, I mean, even the pickup life, the fornicating life, is still against nature in a certain way, not the same way that sodomy is, but it's still against your own nature as an image and likeness of God. We're not made to go out and do that and live that way. So the closer you live to what you were built to be, I mean, the more of a real human being you're going to feel like, and that you will be. There's all kinds of benefits that come with it. First of all, there's the constant drama of that's involved with multiple partners and everything, or like the conflicts and the jealousies, or like I don't know, what are our boundaries? How do we define the relationship? Like the amount of time and energy poured into things like that. And, you know, if you have like a little, forgive me, but if you have like a little harem of 3 or 4 women at a time, you know, some of them are going to want to be your girlfriend or whatever. You got to manage that. And then, how do I word this so that she continues to sleep with me, but won't break up with me, even if I say I don't want anything more? Like, just the amount of time and energy gone into being a selfish jerk. It's so bad for you. I mean, you're hurting them too, right? Like I said, I never hurt women like out of a desire to hurt them, but I hurt them by way of being selfish. Well, it was really how I lived back then. There's also the joy that comes with, you know, having a family and building a life together, someone with the same values as you. No pickup artist cares about the woman's values. You're not listening when she talks, not really. And it's not like it matters if she believes something different than you, because you're just there to have sex with her. And then when she decides to get a different boyfriend or move on, that you just go to a different one, right? So there's no sense of building something together, of growing together, of the reward of seeing yourself in the other person and them in you, being a mirror for each other, which is both good and bad, right? You see your virtue and how you deal with the other person, but also your weakness and what they bring up, and what do you work on together, what do you overcome together. And just building a life, having that sort of trust and that sort of stability. And of course, the MGTOWs and the PUAs would object to that by saying, well, look at the divorce rate. How is that stable, right? Why shouldn't I do what I'm doing? To which I would say, well, the people that are genuinely religious, they don't have that 50% divorce rate. It's still not ideal, but it's certainly not as bad as the average secular marriage. And the secular people, like I was growing up, you know, every time that you start and end a relationship, you are harming your ability for a marriage to last, because you are training yourself to operate as if relationships are temporary. Whether you're conscious of this, whether you can articulate it or not, that's what your brain is learning, right? This is temporary, enjoy it while it lasts, then discard it and move on to the next. Yeah. Well, why would a lifetime of doing that turn off just because you get married? Unless you have something stable, something that's bigger than both of you, like God, like the church, like what it means to have an Orthodox marriage, for example, that's way bigger than you, an ideal to strive for together. And then the nice thing about a Christian marriage is there's 3 people in it. It's you, Jesus, and your wife. It's not just the 2 of you trying to work it out on your own. You have another person truly, you know, mystically and also physically there, if you take Holy Communion, that's helping you, that's showing you what you need to see and guiding you down the path together. So you have the creator of the universe helping you. Well, of course, that's not going to be the same as a secular marriage where, you know, it's essentially just extended dating for most people, right? It's just dating with a ring until they get bored of each other and move on to the next thing. Yeah. My wife was actually a YouTube fan before I met her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I married a fan.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when did you start the YouTube game, and what prompted you?
I want to say it was at the end of 2018 I started it. So I started my channel because after I wrote my book on the Masons and their lies, it spread around pretty quick. A lot of people really liked it. People started saying, hey, you should go on Orthodox interviews and talk to people. And so once I started doing that, people started saying, hey, you should start a channel of your own. I thought, oh, okay. So then I made a channel where I just share things that I'm interested in or whatever's going on at the time. And I probably have like 120, 130, I don't know, a lot of videos. And when they started, I was, I used to be on my stationary bike a lot during live streams. I was like cutting weight, I was taking TRT, I was getting shredded. So it was multitasking, right? I was getting shredded and talking to my audience at the same time. So a lot of my old videos, you'll see me kind of like doing this in the kitchen, and people are like, "Why are you shaking?" Like, no, I'm exercising. Yeah. But then over time, I think as I've gotten a little wiser, a little more mature, I've just kind of peeled back from wanting to be on the internet all the time and being somebody, being a public figure. I still do it because I wrote books and that I want people to read and learn about. So I go out there partly to promote that, or to like have interesting conversations with people and help to evangelize for Orthodoxy and meet people and network. But like that, thankfully, thank God, that desire to be a public figure is one of the passions that I think has been slowly ground down a little bit over time. By my faith, but it's still there. I still have the pride of wanting to be influential and somebody, but I'm working on it by taking a little bit of a step back from the videos.
All the same, what's your current like bugbear, like project? Like what are you concentrating on recently?
So I just finished a book and published it a month ago called Fascism Viewed from the Cross, which I actually have the shiny hardcover of right here. So this took years to write because it's not like I get an advance when I write books. I have a full-time job. I just write what I can in my free time. Plus I have other hobbies and interests like music and exercise. So it's not like I'm a dedicated author. But after that, I tried to take a little break from writing, and my parents came out and visited me. I think it was last October. Like they've been more recently too, but they visited last October, and it was this trip, wasn't it? When was it? So on one of the trips when my parents visited, I'm blanking on which one. My dad brought a classical guitar that I bought in Costa Rica 15 years ago and just kind of never played. And so it's been sitting in my room for a while. And then after the book, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll try this out. I've been playing electric guitar for more than half my life, but not really classical. And so I picked it up and I got a book on classical guitar. And for some reason, I'm really, really into it. Like, I didn't realize how hard this was going to be. I thought, I can play Metallica solos. I can play Iron Maiden songs. How hard can this be? And the answer was extremely hard, even very simple. Like the piece that Fernando Sor wrote to be the first piece a beginner would learn, like his study number 1. These things take me weeks and I'm still not very good at them because there's so much more nuance and delicacy with a classical guitar than there is with electric. When the effects and the amp, you can barely hear the mistakes. A lot of the mistakes you can't hear at all. Whereas with the acoustic, with the nylon strings and everything, every mistake is very, very loud. So I've been very into that lately. And just getting back into weightlifting because I was installing furnaces for a while and I was so exhausted, I just couldn't exercise beyond that. For 8 months, I was an HVAC installer. I couldn't do it. My arms were destroyed. My back was destroyed. Everything hurt by the end of the day. So I was like, well, that's going to be my exercise. So I was still in shape, but I wasn't like building show muscle, not getting a chest workout or biceps, mostly shoulders, because you're like cutting metal above your head all day. So your shoulders get burned out. Your forearms get pretty burned. So just like wholesome hobbies at home, I try to just have a quiet life, and I just go to work, church, and stay at home pretty much. I am, however, I won't say who it is because then I'll dox my location. Tomorrow with another internet personality, we're going to go see the Barbie movie, and I am extremely excited about it. Actually, I didn't plan on mentioning this. The first part of this morning, I spent getting my Ken costume together. So I got the bandana and the workout gloves because all the women are dressing up to see Barbie. Why should they have all the fun?
Yeah, right.
I am going to go in character, and I'm
going to
bleach
your hair, please.
No,
bleach the beard. Come on, bleach the beard.
She said I should get a blonde wig, and I was like, no, I can only go so far. And I was not able to find that big, like, white furry jacket. I was able to find just this like silly green vest. This is going to have to be good enough, Yeah. And what I think is going to be really funny. So I had a choice. So there's a theater up the road that's very crowded. I know there will be women dressed as Barbie there that I could like yell at in Ken character, and it would just be an amazing time for me. But there's another theater closer by that's very small. That's like half the ticket price. And so I ended up going with the cheaper, smaller theater just because I didn't want to spend as much on tickets. But now I'm like, it would have been worth $10 extra to go like really engage with the public as Ken.
Yeah.
And now we might be the only people there in the theater just dressed as Ken. Yeah, I mean, who knows? At this point, it's out of my hands. But that's going to be fun. You got to have guy time where you like go do stuff. And I just saw Mission Impossible with some buddies last week. That's what inspired me. Like I should go out and like do stuff with my guy friends more often. And I've been hearing all this stuff about Barbie being this horrible feminist movie, and I am convinced it's actually a Bible movie. And I'm going to make a video about it.
Nice.
After I watch it.
I know Paul Vanderklay's done something. He just released today. He's a Calvinist minister in Sacramento, and then I'm looking forward to Jonathan Peugeot's input if he ever gets around to it.
Oh, I'm sure he will.
So
I'm sure he will. The symbolism of pink or whatever.
Yeah. Is there
what does the pink mean?
Well, just like I guess like wrapping up or final question, which is probably isn't a final question, but just to kind of tease this, like when you look at the current event or the culture war, whatever you want to call it, like what is the thing that attracts your attention most, or that you're most concerned about, or the attractor in current discourse?
So I have gone out of my way to not watch the news for about 3 years.
Okay.
I hear things that my wife tells me and people at work tell me, or I see like on Twitter. But in terms of like watching a news piece, ever since Joe Biden, quote, became president, unquote, I've been like, this is all fake and dumb, and I don't need to poison my mind with any of this. But I still hear things. And for all Orthodox Christians, the Ukraine situation is a pretty big deal. There's a lot more going on there than is being explained, because people don't know. They don't understand the religious aspect of what's happening there, which is essentially that there is now a fake Orthodox church in Ukraine that was created with the stroke of a pen, which is not how these things work. So they have a whole fake hierarchy with fake bishops, fake priests, and they're using the state to persecute the real Orthodox church in Ukraine. It's called the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, is the real one. And they're arresting priests. They're putting monks under house arrest. They're seizing churches. And they're basically overthrowing Orthodoxy in Ukraine and putting this fake substitute in its place. So we are all very upset about that. I don't follow the specific details of this battle, that battle.
Okay.
But, I see the bigger picture of it. I hear the bigger picture of like, wow, we're doing, we is who's fighting the war in Ukraine. We versus Russia. We are doing very badly. This is just dragging out the inevitable.
Yeah.
Either NATO is going to jump in and it's going to become a world war, or Ukraine's just going to get completely overrun and become part of the Russian Empire.
That fake church, when was that created?
A few years ago.
Okay. And was that a part of like a psyop on part of the West to wrest control from, to destabilize?
I would say so.
Okay.
That's actually why I left Greek Orthodoxy, is because the patriarch, Bartholomew, the patriarch of Constantinople, which is in charge of the Greek Orthodox Church of America, is largely responsible for this schism, as we call it, that's happening in Ukraine. It's not even a schism. It's like just a psyop, like you said. And I was like, I don't want to be under the spiritual obedience of a bishop that acts this way. Okay. Of course, a lot of money has gone missing with Orthodox projects in America. And so my suspicion is that our State Department is heavily involved in this as well, as a way of harming Orthodoxy in general, and specifically Russian Orthodoxy, under whom the true church in Ukraine exists. They're part of the Moscow Patriarchate, which is another aspect of what's going on there.
That's a heavy topic.
Yeah.
Final question, I guess. What do you look when you look? If I guess you're going to make this Barbie video, like, do you have plans in the future for your channel and for your presence, like your intellectual life, and like you have another book in the works? Do you have like a series that is itching at you?
I need to finish a series I started called Christ and the Minor Prophets, where I was going through the minor prophets of the Old Testament, according to the Church Fathers' commentary, showing how Christ is on every page of these Old Testament books. Really incredible stuff that was unfortunately wildly unpopular in terms of my content. People really prefer cultural and political commentary to actually doing Bible study, unfortunately. But when I was doing those, I was also working as a security guard, where I was left in a warehouse by myself for 6 hours a day. So I had a lot more time to read and script out videos. Whereas now I work with my hands and I don't have any free time at work.
Yeah.
Of course, it pays a lot better when you don't have all that free time, because I was just getting paid to watch TV and play guitar and, script videos back then. Someday I'm going to finish those. There's like 6 more of those. I have to finish one more video on the Divine Liturgy, which is our main Sunday service, our version of what Roman Catholics would call the Mass. It's very different than the Mass, but it's the same general liturgical flow, Eucharist focused and whatnot. And beyond that, I do have an idea for a book to write in the future, but I'm not going to do it anytime soon. This last book has been like gnawing at me for 3 years, or maybe 2.5 years. So to have it out there is a big relief. I'll probably do a newer version of my Masonry book, and at some point maybe a newer version of this, just updating them as time goes on, as I learn more. So I'll give you an example. Like, I'm getting a lot of, believe it or not, I'm not being criticized on this by the left at all, which I was
fascism
expecting to.
book? Yeah.
Yeah, the critics are fascists that are saying I'm like not nice enough to Hitler, basically. But one of the critics pointed out something interesting, was that I criticized Hitler because in Mein Kampf he's always talking about fate with a capital F, and I was using this as part of my evidence that he was not a Christian, because he was always talking about this pagan concept of fate with a capital F. And then someone pointed out that in German all nouns start with a capital letter. I was like, oh, yeah, I need to take that sentence out of my next edition,
Yeah.
So as you learn things, not that it detracts from the overall point that he wasn't a Christian, but as I learn things and get feedback, I want the books to be as good as they can be,
Yeah.
To be as accurate as they can be.
And you wrote that book, that word fascism has come into vogue with the rise of Trump, which was more or less inaccurate from my point of view. But is that what you were tackling? And what's kind of the conclusion or your point, your thesis for fascism?
So it's more of a survey than a thesis. So basically the first part of the book goes over the Orthodox Christian perspective on the church itself, on the concept of the state, and in relations with the Jews. And this is all according to the Bible, the church fathers, the canons, and the councils, so our authoritative sources. And then in the second half of the book, I go through Mussolini, Hitler, and the Romanian Corneliu Cadrianu, and comparing their speech and behavior to the Orthodox standard, just saying, okay, this part we could agree with, this part's going too far. So the conclusion is basically that fascism was correct insofar as fighting against communism, but also had a lot of mistakes that keep it outside the boundaries of Christianity. And that any Christian movement moving forward should probably find a better word to use than fascism, is something that Ivan Ilyin, a Russian Orthodox political philosopher, wrote about, and I include his summary in the back of this book as well.
Yeah. What's the general relationship between Orthodoxy and the state?
Nebulous. But the ideal is that they work together, that the church and the state work together but are not the same entity. So it's not like the papal states where the Pope is also a politician or the leader of a community or a nation. That's not our view. They should be separate but cooperate.
Cooperate on what, or toward what end?
Towards the well-being of mankind, materially as far as the state goes, and spiritually as far as the church goes. So kind of just wanting the community to thrive as well as it can, both internally and externally, with each institution, as you could maybe say, focusing on its own sphere, but not overstepping its boundaries into the other sphere.
Yeah. If we end up in a Christian nation, and it turns out to be an Orthodox Christian nation, like, I don't know, the chances of this are probably pretty slim, but what do you think what would that look like if America became Orthodox?
We would have to completely overthrow the Constitution and the foundations of this country, because Orthodoxy I shouldn't say dogmatically. I would say historically, traditionally supports monarchy and not democracy. So it would look like an emperor or a king or a czar working with the church, but not as a cleric himself. The king should be a layperson who is subject to the church, which can penance him when he goes astray, which has happened historically. The emperor himself being penanced by a bishop until he's made it right. But there would not be universal suffrage democracy.
Oh wow!
There would not be a welfare state. There would not be a lot of things would change. We would take care of our country and not spend tens of billions on foreign wars that have absolutely no bearing on the people that live here, besides to make us poorer in our country worse.
Yeah. That's a really big, interesting thought experiment. I wonder if somebody's thought through that. But it'd be interesting to see how that would work out. I mean, just like the details of it, you know.
Well, I have an Orthodox friend, Michael Sisko, who did run for Senate in West Virginia fairly recently. If he had won, we would have seen to some degree what it looked like, but I don't know. Jim Jatras is Orthodox Christian. He worked in government for 20 years. He's got a lot of really interesting content. He did an interview on my channel about the Russia-Ukraine situation you might be interested in. Because as a diplomat, I mean, he really knows the ins and outs of how all this stuff really works. But no, I agree with you. The chances are slim of an Orthodox emperor rising up in America. But we can hope.
Yeah.
We can hope.
Go Byzantines.
That's right.
If you can persuade Yarvin to become Orthodox, maybe you'd have a...
Oh, that'd be great. We need Jordan Peterson to be Orthodox. We need all the influencers who are not Christian to be Orthodox. That's step one.
Yeah. Well, you should go after Tate. You should write him a nice little epistle and bring him into the fold.
I would love to. What's his prison address? Maybe I'll get onto that.
No, he's out of prison now. I guess you don't watch the news. Yeah, he was on Tucker Carlson not too long ago.
Oh, I did hear about that. Yeah. So did he get declared innocent of crimes and he's just charges dropped or what? I
haven't totally followed it. He gives me the creeps and I've seen some of the things that he said and I just can't take him seriously at all. So I just avoid him because I don't like bad men.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. You know, I think there's probably a lot of dads out there that don't like him either. You know, the fathers of all those girls he was trafficking and probably not a big Tate fan, those guys, if I had to imagine.
No.
But yeah, it'd be great if didn't he become a Muslim or something? I heard that he made some turn towards religion, but ended up claiming to be a Muslim.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
They're not interesting enough for me to follow.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I know they're very popular, but I find these things boring.
Yeah.
If it were 10 years ago, I'd be really interested because that's when I was into the manosphere and men's rights. And, you know, but back then the big manosphere guys were like Heartiste, you know, Royce and Bruce back then, Mystery, the pickup artists, like that era has come and gone.
Yeah.
You know, these new guys, they aren't saying anything that hasn't already been said.
Yeah. Just Slicker on TikTok.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, Brother Augustine or Augustine? How
I would say Augustine. Some people say Augustine. Yeah.
Thanks very much for letting me pick your brain and putting you on the spot and getting a little spicy here and there. It was great to talk to you and learn more from you. And I'll link to your work in the description, but do you want to plug it auditorily for the audience?
Auditorily?
Audibly?
Okay. I don't know.
Oratorily?
I don't know. Yeah, why not?
Oratially?
Oratially. So my name is Michael Witcoff. Brother Augustine is my Benedictine title. I have a bunch of books on Amazon. The newest one is Fascism Viewed from the Cross. The one before this was called Theopoetica. It's a book of poetry and comments on the state of poetry, the craft of poetry in general. The one before that is called On the Masons and Their Lies. What every Christian needs to know about Freemasonry. Both that book and Fascism Viewed from the Cross have been #1 best-selling books on Amazon in different categories, each one in more than one category so far, which is really amazing to see. I have a YouTube channel called Brother Augustine. I'm on Twitter as Brother Augustine. Gab, I think, is Michael Witcoff, but it might be Brother Augustine. I'm a boomer with technology.
That's okay.
And then Telegram is Brother Augustine as well. And then Instagram is Brother Augustine. I usually forget to mention all the things, but I think that's all the things.
The things will be down in the description.
So. Yeah, and if people are curious, they're welcome to check that stuff out if they would like.
Absolutely, I will.
And if you ever want to have a conversation about the comment you made that really got my interest in the beginning about relationship versus dogma, I'm happy to have that conversation at some point. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that at a future date. And
it's kind of like saying, "Oh, this is my wife. What's her name?" "Oh, I'm not interested in that kind of dogma. You know, I just know I have a relationship with her. How tall is she? Oh, I avoid that kind of thing. You know, it's the relationship that counts." So See, it could be an interesting talk.
Yeah, it would be good. It'd be good. It'd be good. Let's save that for later. Let me end the recording.